The sun was just beginning to sink behind the hills of Lone Pine when a black SUV rolled down a dusty trail, its tinted windows hiding 4 men with cruel intent. They weren't looking for a fight, just a child and a dog. They saw only a lonely ranch, a widowed mother, and a quiet 11-year-old girl playing with her pet in the field. But what they didn't see was the spirit that guarded her. His name was Axel, a 7-year-old German shepherd with battle scars beneath his fur and a soldier's soul etched into his bones. He had walked through fire in the deserts of Iraq, lost his partner to war, and carried a promise home to protect the ones left behind. On that day, Axel didn't just bark, he remembered. He rose. He fought not with hate but with loyalty, not with rage but with purpose. Because this battle wasn't on foreign soil. It was right here on the porch where she used to read to him under the oak tree her father planted. Some say it was instinct, others say it was training, but those who were there, those who saw what he did to save her, they call it something more. They call it a miracle. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. In the quiet outskirts of Lone Pine, Colorado, nestled between the whispering pines and the jagged silhouettes of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, stood the Winslow Ranch, a modest 2-story farmhouse surrounded by acres of dry meadow and rustling cottonwoods. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin and distant wood smoke, stirred gently by the late afternoon breeze. The days were growing shorter, the shadows stretched long across the porch, and somewhere beyond the fence line a raven called, once then was silent. Harper Winslow stood in the doorway of her home, her arms crossed loosely over a faded blue cardigan, watching the horizon without really seeing it. At 38, Harper had the kind of beauty that had once been effortless, but now lived quietly in the way she held herself. Grace wrapped in resilience. She was tall and slim with high cheekbones and wide hazel eyes that bore both warmth and weariness. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn, was now dulled by years of wind, sun, and sorrow, always tied back in a simple bun. Her hands, once used for design sketches and gallery showings, now carried the calluses of landwork, of repair, of raising a child alone. 5 years ago, her husband, Captain Mason Winslow, had been killed during his 3rd deployment overseas. A roadside bomb outside Mosul had taken his life, but spared his partner Axel, the military canine who had served at his side from the very first tour. Harper hadn't known then how much that dog would come to mean to her and her daughter, or how deeply grief could reshape the very bones of a home. The government had offered to retire Axel into a general adoption program, but Harper had refused. She'd fought to bring him home not out of sentimentality, but out of something deeper. Mason's final letter had asked for one thing: don't let Axel go to strangers. He's family now. Axel had arrived weeks after the funeral, flown in a military crate, sedated and trembling. He was a German shepherd of pure working lineage, 7 years old now, though his muzzle was already dusted with gray. His fur was sable with black overlays, dense and coarse, with a deep scar tracing from his right shoulder to just above the elbow of his front leg. His left hind leg carried the remnants of shrapnel damage, a faint limp that flared up in cold weather. His eyes were the color of old copper alert, calculating and tired in a way that spoke of things unspoken. The first few months were hard. Axel didn't bark. He didn't play. He paced at night, patrolled the perimeter of the house with military precision, and flinched at the sound of thunder or anything that echoed. Harper understood. She too had stopped sleeping properly. The bed felt wrong. The kitchen too quiet. There were mornings she'd forget Mason was gone until she looked at the empty coffee mug beside the sink. But it was Junie, her daughter, who brought the light back into Axel's life. At 11 years old, Junie Winslow was a quiet, thoughtful child, slight of build, with knobby elbows and large brown eyes framed by an untamable mess of curls. She spoke softly, read constantly, and carried a sketchbook almost everywhere she went. Though still a child, Junie had the poise of someone older, shaped by grief and an unusual kind of empathy. She didn't push Axel to engage. She simply sat beside him. Every evening she would settle in the living room with a blanket and a book, reading aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. And Axel, at first wary, eventually began to lie down beside her, his head resting on her lap. He never left her side after that. Now, years later, Axel was no longer just a veteran dog. He was the sentinel of the Winslow home. When Harper walked the fields to check the fence lines, Axel followed. When Junie walked to the mailbox or wandered near the edge of the property, he was always 2 steps behind. He didn't bark unless there was a reason. He didn't beg for attention. But his presence was constant, solid, like an unspoken vow to a man no longer alive. Harper sometimes caught herself speaking to Mason in the quiet of the early mornings, coffee in hand, looking out over the fields. "He still limps a little," she would murmur, "but he's doing okay. He keeps her safe. Just like you wanted." There was a photo on the hallway wall that Junie had insisted on keeping up. Mason kneeling beside Axel in full combat gear, both of them caked in desert dust, both of them smiling like they knew something the rest of the world didn't. That photo had once made Harper cry. Now it made her breathe. That evening after dinner, Harper stood in the doorway again, watching Junie toss a well-worn tennis ball across the yard. Axel moved after it with practiced ease, his limp barely visible in the low light. He caught it mid-bounce and returned to head-high eyes scanning the tree line as he brought the ball back. "He never drops it," Junie said proudly, as Harper came to stand beside her. "He's got good training," Harper replied, running a hand through her daughter's tangled curls. Axel came to a stop beside them, dropping the ball with a gentle huff, and sitting down alert, still waiting. "You think he still remembers, Dad?" Junie asked quietly. Harper looked at the dog, who turned his head slightly as if listening. "I think he never forgot," she said. Not for a second. As dusk settled over the Lone Pine Ranch, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the chimes that hung on the porch. The last of the sun dipped behind the mountains. Harper turned on the porch light. Junie leaned into her side. And Axel, the dog who had seen war and loss, who had once chased enemies through the rubble of ruined cities, now sat before a small home on the edge of the Colorado wilderness, watching the darkness, not with fear, but with purpose. He was not just a pet. He was a guardian, a promise kept, a soldier still. The next morning dawned in silver mist stretching over the meadows like a thin veil. The fields around the Winslow ranch shimmered with dew, and low clouds clung to the tops of the trees. From the porch, Harper Winslow sipped her coffee, the steam rising between her face and the cold air. She had barely slept, though not from worry, more from the sense that the stillness outside wasn't real. Sometimes it was just intuition, or maybe muscle memory from years of waiting for a husband who would never return. This morning, the wind was different. Not loud, just watchful. Inside the house, Junie was getting ready for school. Her backpack was already slung over one shoulder, her sketchbook sticking out at an odd angle, pages fluttering like soft wings with each step. She hummed something under her breath, a habit she'd picked up from her father. Harper turned to call her daughter when Axel suddenly appeared at the porch door. His fur bristled slightly, his posture tall and forward-leaning. He stood completely still, nose turned into the wind, blowing from the west toward the gravel road. "What is it?" Harper asked quietly, stepping outside with bare feet touching the cold wood. Axel didn't move. His ears rotated back and forth, then locked in a fixed position straight ahead, toward the bend where the county road met the edge of their property. She squinted into the distance, but saw nothing, only the empty horizon dust trailing faintly along the fencing. "Just wind," she whispered almost to herself. But Axel remained alert. 3 miles away, the center of Lone Pine had begun its slow awakening. The town was small, less than 3,000 people, and wrapped in a familiarity that bred both safety and quiet suspicion. It was the kind of place where grocery store clerks remembered your dog's name and where secrets once buried often grew roots. At the sheriff's station, Colt Hargrove sat behind his battered metal desk, thumbing through a folder of anonymous reports. At 44, Colt was a man who carried his years with grit rather than grace. His jaw was square, his shoulders broad from years of service as a Marine Corps MP, and his eyes the pale gray of morning frost, sharp, emotionless on the surface, but never unkind. He wore the same tan Stetson he'd owned since deployment now, scuffed and faded, and his boots made a heavy sound on the linoleum floor that had made many young men straighten up mid-lie. A post-it note stuck to the front of the folder read, "Only watch Grady. Transactions don't add up." The message had arrived via an untraceable email the night before, flagged by the FBI's Regional Financial Crimes Task Force, and forwarded to Colt's station with a request to quietly verify. The subject in question, Sterling Grady, Vice President of the Lone Pine Community Credit Union, recent transplant from Nevada, and someone Colt hadn't yet made up his mind about. Sterling was in his mid-50s, slick in a polished way that didn't sit right in Lone Pine. Always in a pressed charcoal suit, his tie matched to the season and shoes that never carried dust. His salt and pepper hair was gelled immaculately each day, and his smile a practiced curvature never quite reached his icy blue eyes. He drove a black Ram 1500 pickup shiny and too new for anyone who actually worked their land. People in town said he was charming. Colt thought he was rehearsed. Colt stood up, grabbed his keys, and tipped his hat to a young deputy named Ellis Roan, who had just started 2 months ago. Ellis was 26, wiry-freckled, and still trying to grow into the badge on his chest. "Keep the channel clear," Colt said. "I'm heading out for a drive." "Want me to pull Grady's bank logs?" Ellis offered. Colt paused, one hand on the doorknob. "Not yet. Let's not wake the bear before we know if it's even real." Back at the Winslow Ranch, Harper had driven Junie to school, then returned to the still quiet house. Axel sat by the window, facing the western road, eyes locked on the horizon, as if the wind still carried something it shouldn't. Harper had noticed it too now, the distant crunch of tires on gravel that never turned into a visitor. Just a sound that lingered, then vanished. By noon, Harper ventured out to mend a broken fence post near the eastern pasture. She wore an old canvas jacket, gloves patched with duct tape, and her boots caked in dried clay. Axel walked beside her without a leash, always slightly ahead, nose low to the ground, tail still. At one point, he stopped, stared into the field beyond the fence line, and growled low, not hostile but warning. Harper followed his gaze. Nothing there, only golden grass booing to the wind. "You're making me paranoid," she muttered, and rubbed the space behind his ear. Axel didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on something far away. That evening, while cleaning up the dinner plates, Harper's phone buzzed with a local sheriff's number. She dried her hands and answered with a soft, "This is Harper." "Harper? It's Colt," came the gruff voice on the other end. "You've seen anything strange out your way lately?" Harper glanced at the window. Axel sat at the threshold again, unmoving. "Not really," she said carefully. "Why, I got a name on my desk that doesn't sit right. Thought I'd start asking around before I make any noise." "Someone in town?" Harper asked. "Someone in your bank," Colt replied. "You ever meet Sterling Grady?" "Yes, polite, a little polished. Polished men usually mean worn truths," Colt muttered. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," he said. "Just keep your eyes open. If Axel ever starts barking, I'd like to know about it." She almost smiled. He doesn't bark unless it matters. Exactly, Colt replied and ended the call. Harper stood by the window long after the phone went silent, her fingers tightening slightly around the frame. In the fading twilight, Axel lifted his head, sniffed the air, then lay down again, but with his eyes open. Watching. The sky over Lone Pine hung heavy with thick gray clouds, the kind that warned of cold rain, but held back just enough to keep the air dry and tense. At Winslow Ranch, the wind was restless again, teasing loose leaves from the trees and sending them tumbling across the gravel drive. Harper stood in the kitchen, her coffee long gone cold in her hands, staring out the window without seeing. Something had been gnawing at her for hours, an unease not unlike the quiet before a storm. Axel sat at his usual post near the front door, his frame still, his eyes scanning the hallway as though waiting for something to step through it. His ears flicked now and then, not at sounds inside the house but outside, unheard by human ears. He had not eaten his breakfast. That alone, Harper thought, was enough to make her stomach tighten. In town, Junie had just finished her last class before lunch. Her school was small, tucked behind the library and firehouse, and made of weathered brick and steel-framed windows. Inside, the rooms smelled of old textbooks, dry erase markers, and cafeteria food. Junie liked school more for the routine than the people. She kept mostly to herself, always with her sketchbook half open on her desk. That day she had drawn Axel curled up under the cottonwood tree at home, his eyes closed but his ears alert. As the bell rang, Junie headed for her locker. Her friend Taylor, a freckled girl with short red hair and a denim jacket covered in embroidered patches, bounced beside her. "You coming over this weekend? We're watching old monster movies at my uncle's." Junie smiled slightly. "I might. Depends on if Axel lets me out of his sight." Taylor laughed. "You talk about that dog like he's your bodyguard." "He is," Junie said simply, turning to her locker. Just then, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, saw the screen light up with a message from Mom. "Running late. Walk home today. Axel's already waiting." Junie's brow furrowed. Her mom never told her to walk home without checking in person, especially not when the forecast looked like it might rain. And Axel didn't go anywhere without Harper unless it was urgent. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. A lesson echoed in her mind, one her father had taught her years ago, one he'd insisted they remember like second nature. If anything ever feels wrong, anything at all, ask for the password. She typed back calmly. "What's the code word, Mom?" She waited, eyes fixed on the phone. Seconds passed. A new message appeared. "Don't be silly, honey. Just come home." Junie's heart began to thump. Her real mother never skipped the code. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned to Taylor. "I need to use the office phone." "You okay?" Taylor asked, frowning. Junie didn't answer. She walked quickly toward the front of the school. She never made it. A man emerged from the hallway exit near the gym average height, stocky build, wearing a tan work jacket and sunglasses even indoors. His beard was short and gray-flecked, and he walked with the kind of purpose that made people subconsciously get out of the way. He was not a teacher, not a janitor. Junie didn't know who he was, but Axel would have growled the second he saw him. The man moved fast. A hand clamped over Junie's mouth before she could cry out, and a second arm locked around her middle, lifting her off the floor with practiced ease. She kicked, thrashed, scratched her phone, dropped and shattered on the linoleum. He pulled her through a side door marked Staff Exit, dragging her into a waiting silver van idling near the dumpsters. The side door slammed shut. The van roared to life and peeled away before anyone noticed she was gone. Inside the van, Junie's wrists were tied with zip ties, and duct tape was slapped across her mouth. She tried to remember everything, every face, every sound. There were 2 men besides the one who took her. One bald one with a tattoo of a snake coiled around a dagger on his forearm. They spoke in low voices, shifting between English and Spanish. She caught fragments. Bank codes, leverage, mother will cooperate. Junie's eyes burned, not with tears, but fury. She knew what this was. At that exact hour, Harper had been working on her laptop in the dining room, reviewing invoices for a design consultation she rarely had time for anymore. Axel had begun pacing 5 minutes earlier. Not the usual casual loop of the house, this was precise. Calculated. Military. He stopped at every window, stared, moved on. Stopped, stared, tensed. Then the knock came. 3 fast raps, 2 firm, 2 controlled. Harper opened the door half an inch and was shoved back hard. 2 men in plain clothes, both armed, stormed into the house, pushing her to the ground. Axel barked for the first time in over a year, a deep, thunderous sound that made the walls vibrate. He lunged, teeth bared, but stopped short as one of the men leveled a pistol at Harper's head. "Sit," the man growled. "Now." Axel froze, breathing hard. His muscles shook with restraint. Harper looked up from the floor, stunned, but already calculating. The taller of the 2 men was in his late 30s, olive-skinned, lean, and dressed like a contractor khakis, steel-toed boots windbreaker. His eyes were cold, sharp, and hungry. "Your daughter's safe," he said. "For now. If you cooperate. What do you want?" Harper hissed, voice dry with rage. "Your banking access. You work for a private account management firm. One of your clients is on our list. We need those transfers cleared. No flags, no trace. I don't have that kind of authority." He smiled. "You will once your daughter screams." Axel took a step forward, growling low, his teeth bared again. The man with the pistol shifted his aim toward him now. Down, the man barked. "Call off the dog." Harper raised a hand, slowly, voice calm but stern. "Axel, stay." Axel's body coiled with tension, eyes locked on the threat, but he obeyed. He stood his ground just a few feet from Harper, not attacking, but not retreating either. The second man threw Harper into a chair and slid her laptop forward. "Start logging in." She did, but her thoughts were spinning, her heart hammering louder than the keys beneath her fingers. And Axel remained beside her chair, rigid, and watching, breath hot and slow gaze, never leaving the intruders. The silver van pulled into the Winslow property just after 4 in the afternoon. The sky was darkening prematurely, casting the ranch into a somber gray hue as the first light rain began to fall. It wasn't heavy, just enough to blur the outlines of things. Fences, tree lines, the old swing, still swaying in the wind. The gravel crunched beneath the van's tires as it came to a stop just beyond the main house. No neighbors would see it. No one ever drove this far up the hill unless they belonged there. Inside the vehicle, Junie struggled against the restraints at her wrists, the duct tape over her mouth making her breaths sharp and panicked through her nose. Her small frame was tense, eyes burning with fury more than fear. She had been quiet the entire ride, storing every detail, the voices, the direction of the turns, the click of a weapon being loaded, and the faint buzz of a burner phone. The man sitting beside her was older, mid-50s, with skin leathery from sun and neglect, and a cold expression that rarely changed. His name, she had heard one of the others say, was Rico. He had a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, and a cobra tattoo coiled on the side of his neck. He hadn't looked at her like a child. He'd looked at her like leverage. The van's side door slid open. Rain tapped against the metal roof like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. Rico reached in, hauled Junie out with one arm, and carried her swiftly to the porch. His grip wasn't cruel, but there was no care in it. Another man stood guard at the side, a tall, thin man in a denim jacket and hood, holding a rifle low. He nodded once as they passed, wordless. Inside the house, Harper was seated at the dining table, her laptop in front of her, and a man standing behind her with a pistol still loosely aimed in her direction. His name was Luis Mendez, though he hadn't shared it. In his late 30s of medium height and athletic build, Luis moved with a calculated arrogance. His eyes were quick, assessing everything from Harper's typing speed to the subtle clench of her jaw. Axel was lying a few feet away, muscles taut, tail flat against the hardwood floor. His ears twitched at the sound of the van. When the door opened again, he stood but didn't move forward. The gun in Luis's hand lifted an inch. "Careful, sweetheart," Luis muttered. "Wouldn't want your dog to lose his temper." The door opened and Junie was shoved inside. She tripped forward slightly but caught herself with her knees. Rainwater dripped from her tangled hair onto the wooden floor. Her hands were still bound, her face streaked with road dust and quiet defiance. Harper half rose from her seat before the pistol's aim returned to her chest. "Sit," Rico said, now entering and shutting the door behind them. Harper and Junie's eyes met, locked across the room in one heavy moment. Junie blinked once. Harper gave the smallest nod, and that was enough. The signal, the unspoken survival code Mason had taught them. Don't act until you see the whites of their eyes. Luis turned toward the girl. There she is, so polite, not a word. Must have inherited that from her mother. Rico tossed a hand towel to Harper. "Dry her off, she'll catch cold." Junie was untied, and the tape removed her skin, red where the adhesive had clung. Harper pulled her close, wrapping the towel around her shoulders and checking her limbs for bruises. None. But her daughter's expression was fierce, alive with something unspoken. Luis moved behind Harper and glanced at the laptop screen. "Still not in, I told you." Harper said, her voice flat. "These things take time, especially without raising alerts." "We're not here all night," Rico growled. "Try harder." Axel stood now, fully alert. His hackles were raised, but he hadn't moved from his place. His eyes flicked between the three men in the room. His weight shifted slightly, front legs planted wider. He made no sound. "What's with the dog?" the rifleman at the porch asked, stepping inside to escape the drizzle. "He's creeping me out." "Just keep your weapon close," Luis said. "Big dogs don't mean much when you put 2 rounds center mass." But Axel didn't look at any of them for long. His gaze always returned to Junie. She sat beside her mother now, whispering, "He knows." "I know," Harper replied, just as quiet. "Don't move unless I say." In the back of the house, past the pantry and the old brick fireplace, Mason had laid by hand a hallway led toward the cellar and back bedrooms. It was in that hallway Axel would have retreated 2 years ago when storms were too loud or fireworks startled his nerves. It was also where Mason had hidden a small emergency compartment behind a false wall panel, a lockbox, and an old service radio still tuned to the emergency sheriff band. Harper's eyes drifted once toward that hall. Luis followed her gaze. "Stay here," he told Rico, and began walking toward the hallway with slow, deliberate steps. Axel moved instantly, his body sliding between Harper and Junie like a living barrier. He didn't growl. He didn't snap. He just stared still as stone. Luis laughed once, low and amused. "He's got discipline, I'll give him that." He turned back. "Finish the login, or the kid gets to see how fast dogs bleed." Harper stared down at the keyboard, her hands now visibly shaking. Junie reached for Axel's fur, burying her fingers just behind his ear. Her lips didn't move, but her hand did 3 slow presses. A signal they'd used once a long time ago during a drill Mason had insisted on. Axel stiffened beneath her fingers. Rain tapped steadily against the tin roof of the Winslow house, a rhythm too soft to drown out the rising tension inside. The walls felt closer, the air tighter. Every sound, the creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator became a needle's edge waiting to snap. Junie's fingers remained tucked in Axel's thick sable fur, her hand trembling just slightly as she repeated the pressure. 1, 2, 3. The signal. The one Mason had taught them in the old barn during those long weekends of emergency drills. 3 presses mean go loud. Do not wait. Axel didn't flinch, he didn't bark, he waited. Luis turned from the hallway unaware that anything had shifted. Behind him, Harper sat at the table, her laptop screen glowing with the login interface for her firm's secure server. She wasn't typing anymore. Her fingers hovered just above the keys like they were frozen in time. Beside her, Rico leaned forward, impatient. "Why'd you stop?" Harper didn't answer. Her gaze had moved past Rico, past the edge of the screen, past her own fear, and straight into Junie's eyes. A flicker of acknowledgement passed between them, subtle but alive. Junie exhaled softly. Then everything happened at once. Axel surged forward with the force of a freight train, his body a blur of muscle and trained fury. His paws barely made a sound on the hardwood as he launched toward Rico, jaws, wide legs extended. Rico only had time to shout before Axel collided with him, chest first, knocking the man backward into the dining hutch with a crash of splintering wood and shattered glass. The gun in Luis's hand started to rise too late. Axel turned midair, his powerful frame twisting with perfect balance, and lunged for the weapon. His teeth closed around Luis's wrist with a crack like a snapped branch. The gun clattered to the floor. Luis screamed, spinning to the side, his eyes wild with pain. Junie dropped low, grabbing the weapon with both hands the way her father had shown her once in the field. Harper grabbed her daughter and yanked her behind the kitchen island just as a second shot rang out, aimless, panicked. Axel didn't retreat. He turned his entire body between Luis and the girls, his stance, broad chest heaving. Blood darkened the fur at his shoulder, but he didn't acknowledge it. His teeth remained bared, the deep rumble in his throat like a warning from a long-dead war. The man at the porch, the one with the rifle, burst through the door gun, raised, but froze at the sight of Luis on the floor, and Rico groaning in a mess of broken glass. Harper didn't wait. With a guttural yell, she rose from behind the counter and fired. The shot hit the wall inches from the rifleman's head, but it was enough. He ducked and ran, his footsteps pounding down the porch steps and vanishing into the rain-darkened yard. Axel lunged again, knocking Luis flat as the man tried to crawl toward the fallen weapon. Harper aimed the gun now directly at Luis's face. "Don't," she said, voice cold. "You so much as blink wrong, I'll paint the floor with you." Luis froze, his face twisted with fury, blood dripping from his wrist. Rico groaned again, now pinned beneath a splintered hutch. His breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, one hand clutching his ribs. Junie stepped out from behind the island, still holding the gun with both hands, but her hands were steady now. From outside, the back door slammed. Colt Hargrove's voice boomed through the house a split second later. "Sheriff's office, drop your weapons." 3 deputies followed him in weapons drawn. Colt, soaked to the bone, and breathing hard, took one glance at the scene, the blood, the broken furniture, Harper's gun still aimed. Axel standing over Luis with lips still curled in threat, and nodded once. "Jesus," he muttered. "You weren't kidding." Colt was tall 44, with a weathered face that made him look perpetually exhausted but sharp. His jaw was squared, and his uniform, dampened by rain, showed the creases of body armor beneath. Behind him, Deputy Ellis Roan, the young man with the wiry build and nervous eyes, stared wide-eyed at Axel. "Cuff him," Colt ordered. Ellis moved fast zip ties ready, while the other 2 deputies cleared the rest of the house. Colt approached Harper slowly. "You okay?" Harper nodded, finally lowering the gun. "They took her from school, came in through the front like they owned the place." She sent an emergency ping, Colt said, tilting his head toward Junie. We got it traced to her phone before it was crushed. Axel stood still now, blood running down his leg, panting hard, but never leaving Junie's side. Luis was restrained, silent, his eyes narrowed in fury. Rico was barely conscious. Colt turned to Axel. That dog just saved all your lives. He wasn't a dog today, Harper said. He was Mason. Outside in the gathering dark, rain fell heavier now. Ellis noticed movement by the tree line and called out. Got someone fleeing east, let him run, Colt said, checking his radio. We've got eyes on the road. They won't get far. But Axel had already moved. Without a word, without a sound. He stepped past the threshold, sniffed once, and broke into a run. His limp gone, his form low to the ground, like the ghost of a soldier in pursuit of unfinished war. Harper called after him once, but Axel didn't stop. Junie moved to the porch and stood in the rain watching him disappear into the trees. Her small voice rose above the downpour. Come back. The forest beyond the Winslow property was thick with pine and low-hanging mist, the kind that clung to the earth like breath. Rain still fell in sheets, soaking the needles, darkening the soil. The silence was deceptive, broken only by the distant crack of branches and the sharp rhythm of paws striking mud. Axel moved through the underbrush like a shadow reborn, low-fast, driven by scent and memory. His leg throbbed where the bullet had grazed him earlier, but the pain was distant. His focus was absolute. The man he chased, the last of the intruders, had made a break for the tree line the moment the tide had turned. Tall, wiry, with a faded green hoodie and a face still unseen, he had vanished into the forest without looking back. But he'd left a trail. Broken twigs, footprints, and soft dirt, the faint scent of gun oil and sweat. Axel followed. Back at the house, Colt Hargrove was issuing rapid orders from his radio voice, low and clipped. His uniform was soaked, his boots caked in mud. He stood beneath the eaves, sheltering Harper and Junie, who sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch swing. The house was being cleared by deputies while paramedics checked Rico and Luis before transport. Harper hadn't spoken since Axel disappeared into the trees. Junie watched the tree line as if her eyes alone could bring him back. Deputy Ellis Roan appeared beside Colt holding a rugged GPS tablet encased in a waterproof shell. We've got a ping, he said. Axel's collar just activated. Auto-triggered when he passed the perimeter, Colt muttered. Good boy. The collar installed months ago as a precaution by Harper's brother, a retired Air Force technician named Grant, was a small, inconspicuous device hidden beneath Axel's ID tag. It was designed to transmit a location ping to the sheriff's office and Harper's phone if Axel left the ranch under stress. Colt tapped the screen. A red dot was moving fast, heading northeast, deeper into the forest. Colt turned to Ellis. Get in touch with Special Agent Monroe. Tell him it's happening now. 30 miles away, at a satellite FBI field office in Durango, Special Agent Layla Monroe received the call as she stood over a wall-sized map riddled with colored pins and string. In her early 40s, with a sharp-cut bob and a presence that made rooms pause when she entered, Layla had the calm precision of someone who'd once defused car bombs in Kabul. She was dressed in a rainproof field jacket, her badge clipped to her belt, and a sidearm strapped tightly to her hip. Let's move, she said to her team. Colt's got a live asset in pursuit. Mobilize drone coverage. I want infrared scans over the northeast ridge in 5 minutes. Layla had been tracking cartel laundering operations through rural banks in the southwest for 6 months. Lone Pine's small-town bank had seemed an unlikely node until Sterling Grady's name had surfaced. Grady, with his spotless resume, carefully curated charity work and recently acquired land just outside town, had been the one variable that didn't fit. Now, with 3 suspects in custody and 1 on the run, the field was finally cracking. Axel darted through the trees, his breath even despite the terrain. The trail was fresher now. He caught Flash's boot prints slipping on wet moss, a broken watch band snagged on bramble. 100 yards ahead, the man stumbled, cursed under his breath, and kept running. Axel's ears flicked, his tail stiffened. He sped up. Then something shifted. The scent trail turned sharply toward a rock outcropping near a dry creek bed. Axel slowed. The earth here was disturbed, dug out. He sniffed once, then twice. His ears pulled back. The scent wasn't just human now. Gasoline, old metal, concrete dust, storage. He let out a short, low bark. Behind him, Colt appeared with 2 deputies' rifles raised, drenched and panting. "You hear that?" Colt asked, already moving toward Axel's location. He waved his men into a spread formation covering angles. Within minutes, the FBI team arrived. Layla approached the site, examined the disturbed ground, then looked at Axel, who now stood absolutely still, facing a cluster of moss-covered stones. "There's something under there," Layla said. Within the hour, the agents uncovered a concealed hatch beneath the stones and dirt, an old septic system that had been retrofitted into a bunker. Inside were 4 metal crates, each stamped with foreign bank logos and false IDs. 2 crates held bricks of bundled cash. Another held a laptop still logged in to an encrypted laundering network. The 4th, closed with a steel lock, contained weapons. But what made Layla exhale was the file folder resting on top. Inside, transaction authorizations, names, offshore accounts, and in bold print, Sterling Grady's signature across 6 different shell corporations. By dawn, Sterling Grady was escorted from his glass-walled corner office at the Lone Pine Community Credit Union in handcuffs. He had shown no emotion, no denial, no outburst. Just a soft chuckle and a single line. "Guess the dog was smarter than I thought." Harper watched the arrest from her porch news vans already lining the distant road. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Junie sat curled against her side, a blanket draped around them both. Axel lay at their feet, dirty, bloodied, but alive. When Harper leaned down to stroke behind his ear, he let out a long breath and pressed his head into her palm. He had not slept since the night before, but he finally closed his eyes. The morning sun crept over the hills of Lone Pine for the first time in days, brushing the wet pine trees with a soft golden hue. The air smelled of rain-washed earth smoke from distant chimneys and the faint sweet trace of lilacs blooming along the Winslow fence line. The ranch was quiet but not hollow. The danger had passed. The fear had faded. But something else had settled in its place, something deeper. A stillness that came after surviving the storm. Inside the kitchen, Harper Winslow stood at the counter in her robe, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. The bruises along her forearms had started to yellow, but she ignored them. Her long chestnut hair was tied loosely, strands falling into her eyes as she watched her daughter out the window. Harper hadn't worn makeup in years, but there was a softness to her face today, the first signs of rest easing the tension in her features. She hadn't cried the night Sterling Grady was arrested. She hadn't cried when the FBI cleared her name. But this morning, as she watched Junie play fetch with Axel on the damp lawn, she blinked several times longer than necessary. Junie was laughing again. The girl wore rain boots, 2 sizes too big, and a yellow sweater that once belonged to her father. She had braided her curls messily down her back, and every time Axel dropped the ball at her feet, she clapped like he had never done it before. Her voice had returned, still soft, still hesitant, but stronger with every word. The therapy sessions hadn't started yet, but Harper knew Axel was already doing the work. Axel's limp had worsened over the past few days. The chase through the forest had pushed his healing leg too far, reopening scar tissue and leaving him stiff in the mornings, but he never once refused to rise when Junie called his name. He moved slowly now, with the measured dignity of a veteran, his sable fur damp from the morning dew, his ears still alert. His eyes, amber and calm, never strayed too far from Junie. Across town, Sheriff Colt Hargrove adjusted the collar of his pressed uniform as he stood in front of the community center. The day's event wasn't official. No ribbons, no speeches, but the people of Lone Pine had shown up anyway. Dozens of them. Farmers in worn jeans, retired couples holding warm coffee veterans in old service jackets. And in the center of it all, on a simple plywood stand with a spray-painted banner, stood Colt with a printed folder in one hand and a makeshift plaque in the other. Behind him, an easel displayed a photograph taken only 3 days earlier. Axel, mid-leap jaws clamped around the wrist of an armed man, with Harper and Junie blurred in the background. Colt's voice carried gently through the microphone. This town has always believed in quiet courage. We don't look for heroes here, but sometimes one finds us anyway. He held up the plaque, a simple wooden board engraved with the words, Axel, Protector, Soldier, Friend. In the crowd, a tall woman in her 60s wiped her eyes. That was Ruth Holloway, a retired military nurse who had moved to Lone Pine after losing her husband in Afghanistan. She had once told Colt she couldn't live near reminders of the war, but now she approached Harper slowly. Her shoulders squared, her silver bun tucked neatly under a knit hat. Ruth had deep-set brown eyes and a firm grip as she extended her hand. "I never thought I'd want another animal after we lost Ranger," she said. "But seeing Axel out there reminded me, not all battle scars mean the fight is over. Sometimes they just mean we're still needed." Harper smiled and shook her hand. He never stopped being needed. Later that afternoon in Colt's office, a laminated folder sat open on his desk. A new initiative, something he had drafted after speaking with Layla Monroe and a few members of the local VFW chapter. The header read, Guardian Paws a Lone Pine Project. Its mission was simple: connect retired military working dogs with veterans and Gold Star families in rural communities. Colt had already called in favors from his old Marine buddies. One worked at a training center in Fort Carson. Another had access to dogs finishing their final deployments. Harper had agreed to help design the outreach materials, and Junie had volunteered to draw the program's logo, a dog's paw pressed against a soldier's hand surrounded by pine trees. Back at the ranch, Junie sat on the porch swing sketching the final version. Axel lay beside her, his head resting on her boot. The sun had warmed the wooden floorboards beneath them, and for the first time in a long time the breeze smelled of safety. "Do you think they'll really use it?" Junie asked. Harper, sitting nearby with her laptop, looked up. "I think they'd be lucky to." Axel raised his head slightly, ears twitching at the sound of a car in the distance. But it wasn't danger anymore. It was delivery groceries from town brought by a neighbor who had refused to leave them alone this week. As the car door closed and birds began to return to the trees, Harper exhaled and leaned back. No, she wouldn't leave this place. Not for fear, not for ghosts. Mason had built the fence with his own hands. He had planted the cottonwoods. This was his legacy. But more than that, it was where Axel had become more than a war dog. It was where he had found purpose again. The auditorium at Lone Pine Elementary was modest, just a refurbished gym with collapsible risers, and a curtain that had faded from burgundy to a sort of dusty rose. The wooden floor still bore scuff marks from past basketball games and science fairs. But that morning, it was transformed. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, and a banner in childlike font stretched across the back wall. Voices of courage, student presentations, parents, teachers, and students filled the space chatting in low tones, programs in hand. Harper sat in the second row, a hand resting on her knee, the other lightly touching Axel's back. The German Shepherd lay at her feet, head up, eyes scanning the room with measured calm. His leg was still stiff, wrapped in a soft brace, but he didn't seem to mind. His fur had been brushed that morning by Junie herself, and he wore a clean red bandana that read Lone Pine's Guardian in black block letters. Junie was backstage, nervously adjusting the pages of her speech. Her teacher, Mrs. Renner, gave her a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. A woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a loose braid. Mrs. Renner had a calming presence and a reputation for seeing potential in the quietest students. She wore a long floral dress and a turquoise shawl, and her gentle but firm tone had made her a favorite among many. "You've got this, Junie," she said, crouching to her level. "Just say it the way you wrote it. You already lived it." Junie nodded, her dark curls tied in a simple ponytail, cheeks flushed with nervous energy. She wore a navy dress with pockets, one of which held a small crumpled drawing of Axel she'd made the day before. Her boots tapped lightly on the wooden floor as her name was announced. As she stepped out onto the stage, the chatter died. She stood behind the microphone, glancing once at the crowd, then at Harper and Axel. Her fingers gripped the edges of her note cards. She took a breath. "My name is Junie Winslow," she began, "and I want to tell you about someone who saved me, even when I didn't know I needed saving." There was a hush. Even the teachers stopped adjusting their clipboards. "He's not just a dog," she said, her voice steadier now. "He's a soldier. His name is Axel. And he used to work with my dad overseas before he didn't come home." Junie paused. Harper sat perfectly still. "Axel came to live with us after that. He was quiet, like me. He didn't bark or play at first. He just watched. But every night I'd sit next to him and read, and slowly he started to listen. I think he knew what it felt like to miss someone." A few people wiped their eyes. "Then a few weeks ago, something scary happened. Some very bad men came to our house. They tried to hurt my mom. They took me. And Axel didn't just bark this time. He fought, he chased, he protected us like a real soldier, like he remembered who he was." She looked down, blinked, then raised her eyes again. "Everyone says he's a hero. And he is. But not just because of that day. He's a hero because he came home. Because he learned how to live again. Because he helped us feel safe enough to smile. And maybe courage isn't just going to war. Maybe it's learning how to love again after the war is over." The room went still. Then someone clapped, then another, and another. In seconds, the room erupted into applause. Harper blinked hard, biting back a wave of tears, and Axel lifted his head with quiet dignity, ears, twitching eyes, finding Junie across the stage. After the event, people approached them slowly, offering soft congratulations. Axel remained close, accepting pats with grace, his body always angled slightly between Junie and the crowd. Among those who came forward was Reverend Clay Harwood, the town's pastor, a tall, soft-spoken man in his early 60s with a kind face and deep voice. He wore a tan blazer over a worn blue button-down and carried a notebook stained with coffee rings. "You know," he said to Harper, gently ruffling Axel's ear, "some folks say, 'God speaks in thunder.' But I think sometimes he sends us quiet protectors. Four-legged ones, too." Harper smiled. "I think you're right." That night, back at the ranch, the three of them sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets. The stars were out brilliant and clear after so many overcast days. Junie rested her head on Harper's shoulder, Axel lying stretched between their feet. Harper reached down her hand, resting lightly on the dog's shoulder. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You kept us whole." Axel didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the porch boards. Later, as Junie went inside to get ready for bed, Harper remained. She opened an old photo album on her lap, thumbing through pages until she found the one she always returned to Mason in uniform, crouched beside Axel in the sand. She traced her finger across the image, her throat tightening. You knew, didn't you? She murmured to the photo. You knew he wouldn't just protect us. He'd bring us back to life. Axel shifted slightly and rested his chin on her foot. Harper looked down and smiled. He wasn't wearing a medal. He didn't need one. He was their shield, their bridge back to joy, their silent sentinel who'd carried the weight of war not just with muscle but with love. And somehow, even after losing everything, he had chosen to stay. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in thunder or glory. Sometimes they come quietly on four legs with watchful eyes, and a heart trained not just to fight, but to love. Axel wasn't just a war dog. He was a promise kept, a reminder that healing doesn't always come from forgetting, but from choosing to love again after loss. Maybe God doesn't always send angels with wings. Maybe sometimes he sends them with fur and scars to remind us that protection, grace, and redemption can wear a soldier's collar. In our daily lives, we often rush past the quiet protectors, the ones who carry weight so we don't have to, the ones who stand guard over our peace without asking for applause. But they are there, in our families, in our memories, in the quiet corners of our lives where faith still whispers. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to honor the heroes who protect in silence. And if you believe that love, loyalty, and God's grace still move through the world, comment Amen below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that reveal the courage of both man and beast. May God bless you and those who protect you in ways seen and unseen.